Hey, what's up, everybody? This is GameLogIQ from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, back with another episode of the Enough to Keep Going weekly games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Here with me, as always, I have my erstwhile stalwart partner in crime, Mr. DBQ Hams. How you doing, DBQ?
Oh, I'm doing well. That opening music makes me feel like I'm stepping onto an unexplored planet in Starfield or No Man's Sky, right? It's just that kind of techno 70s sci-fi pulse. So, good way to start off the show tonight.
And despite those feelings, neither of those games are in tonight's rundown. So without much
Very
further
true.
ado, let's get to it. Coming to you here an hour earlier tonight, just because. So, DBQ, you are first in the rundown in our main GX stories segment, our gamer experiences for the past week.
Yeah, last week I kind of teased a little bit that I've been playing the Plucky Squire on PlayStation 5. This is published by Devolver Digital. It came out mid-September, kind of got mixed reviews, a lot of, good conceptual art design, but not necessarily complete in its execution with some of the knock on it in the reviews. And I see it, but I'm also really enjoying it. It is, in part, it is because there's just a charmingness to it. You know, any parent that's had, that's read children's storybooks to their kids, or anybody that can identify with reading children's storybooks and kind of the cadence and the page turning and the illustrations really hits that kind of theme here nicely as you're kind of going through a storybook. And the story here is that your main character is in a storybook. It is a storybook creation. One of the characters from the storybook figures out that they are characters and that he is trying to escape from the storybook. And so this is where you get the mixture that's is out in the trailers and in the, as you've seen in other media around it, where you're both in a 2D kind of Zelda esque aspect, and then also in a 3D on the tabletop and around the outside the book world. So it starts off pretty slow, but so do all Zeldas. I think we had that conversation last week in terms of how talky and slow some Zeldas, traditional Zeldas, can start off. This is very much in that same vein. It is, and some of that continues, that some of the talkiness, some of the over explanation, it definitely feels like it's geared toward younger kids who may be playing it on their own independently, where it will do the classic of panning the camera out to show you what you're supposed to do, but then also have a character there speak to you and tell you what you're supposed to do. And as you go through, some of those things become a little more optional, that you can engage with a character that will give you hints, or you don't have to. I find the 2D world and the art style, the real bright, vibrant colors of the art style, really engaging and fun to play. I'm enjoying the kind of traditional, top-down Zelda mechanics, as we were talking about Echoes of Wisdom last week with Tao, in terms of this different spin on those mechanics with Zelda and the wand. Here it's very much in that traditional, you have a sword, you've got a spin attack. It does a little bit of some Scribblenauts-esque, where because it's a storybook, you can mix some words around, but they are very linear puzzles. It is not Scribblenauts. It's not open-ended puzzle solving, that there are multiple words that could potentially work and give you different things, but it is looking for a specific answer, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's just it speaks to the scope of the game, that it's a very narrow scope. It's trying to do something, and because of that, it also means that it's not as open, as free flowing as you may want. If you can envision other ways to solve a puzzle, you pretty much are stuck within the designer's scope. The third, the 3D perspective as you're coming out onto the table, it starts off it starts off in stealth, which isn't necessarily great, but eventually you start to get a sword and other movement aspects out in the quote unquote real world, and that opens up and there's some nice kind of switching between puzzles. So it's pretty light, it's pretty breezy, it's also relatively enjoyable. I don't know that I'm playing it through PlayStation, which was part of the PlayStation Premium. I think it's one that I would look for a sale. Like if it hits under $20, it feels like it's in a good price point. It's not necessarily a whole lot there if you're, if you know that you like top-down Zeldas and are looking for something like that. Granted, there's plenty of those out there, but it's very cute. It's very charming, but it isn't necessarily, for as much as I thought it might do something different because of the art style and the switch between the storybook and the real world, it doesn't seem like it's really pushing any creative boundaries.
So when did this game come out?
Mid-September. I can look up the actual date here, but
So this is a new game.
Yes, new game came out. Let's see here. Came out in. It's on PlayStation and it's on everything. Xbox September 17th. PlayStation, Xbox, PC, and Switch.
And so it's in PlayStation Plus Premium.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Just
Is it in Game Pass?
It's not in Game Pass right now. No. Nope.
So because you tend to often dig into the news details on this, any scuttlebutt that you know as to why the game showed up as a new game on PlayStation Plus Premium?
I don't know. Let's see. I'm trying to think of the other game, the Tales of Kanzaru, right? The Metroidvania one from earlier, very similar to the Prince of Persia one from January. That came up in the PlayStation Premium package and has not gone to another, it's not out there in Game Pass or EA Play at this point yet either. So it must just be piece by piece, whatever kind of deals they're making at the PlayStation level.
And I think there's less of an ado about like it showing up on other subscription services, because PlayStation Plus Premium is typically not canted at new things. Now, before, when we used to have, I don't even remember what PlayStation Plus was before.
Right. I think before you had the multiple tiers, you just had the PlayStation Plus, which was simply you're paying for multiplayer and you got 2 games per month. And those it was 2-3 games still exist. Yeah.
Right. So it was the competitor to Xbox Live Gold.
Exactly. Yep. It was very much Games with Gold.
So,
or Games with Gold then became the competitor for PlayStation Plus, I think.
Yeah. So when we had it, when it was like that, we had things like Among Us and we had Fall Guys who showed up in those services first, and they were like the free, is one of the 2 free games for that month. So I guess this is, kind of the equivalent of that kind of business model continuing forward, just under the new umbrella of PlayStation Plus Premium, I guess.
Yeah, I think. I mean, the Fall Guys one definitely launched first on PlayStation and was free to Plus members. This is strictly a single player game. This is not anything that, we had this week. We also had the announcement that Foam Stars is going free to play. Foam Stars from Square back in February, which was kind of the Splatoon-like multiplayer shooter. It launched on PlayStation Plus day of as a game included with PlayStation Plus there, which makes sense given you're trying to build a player base, but that not in the premium section.
Right. So this is a game that has captured the zeitgeist of the media. Can you rattle off like the top 3 reasons why you think? I mean, and we talked last week about like this is the year of the indie. we talked about, a couple of these titles that have kind of gotten their hooks into the media, like Balatro, often to the surprise, Helldivers, which is, not strictly an indie game and is at a scale that I think equates it much more so to like a typical, double A or triple A game. But this is one that's smaller in scale. So, I mean, what are your top 3 reasons why you think it's gotten its hooks into people?
I think it got its. I think that the challenge with it and what I've seen, right? It got a lot of coverage in the middle of September when it came out. I didn't have a chance to play it when it first launched, but I had listened to a number of coverage. I read a few reviews, but mainly listened to people playing it on the podcast. And most of the podcast kind of impressions of it were pretty mixed. Like I think it, by the nature of its art style, in the kind of storybook aspect and the way that it looked like it was blending 2D and 3D kind of platform action and adventure into it, it seemed to really hook people or get people interested. There were a lot of people who were very excited about this release. It was announced a year ago. I think last August of 23, I think, is when we had an announcement around it. And so it's been out there, and the art style is very whimsical, very childlike, and inviting in that way, in a in a space where oftentimes indie games are pixelated, or they are a little more they are a little more over the top in terms of either realism or violence. I think, as Hero Down Under says, right, it's a storybook style. Like, I think that in and of itself, the previews of this really made it click with people or got people excited about it. But then I think where the friction became is that it didn't live up to the hope in terms of both the creativity that I was talking about, in terms of the ability to solve those puzzles in multiple different ways, or that it isn't as open and creative as the art style lends itself toward. So I think I think from what I've seen is that it did capture a lot of excitement, but I feel like it's also, at this point, 3 weeks in, has kind of fallen off radars as well.
So the coverage on this gives me Cuphead feelings, and I don't mean in terms of like the game, but I just mean in terms of its critical reception. Do you feel like it's tracking like that amongst the media and evoking those same kind of feelings?
I think so. I mean, I think I can see where that is. I think the Cuphead piece is probably a more fundamentally sound and consistent game. It's a little tighter, but it also needs to be based on the type of game that it is. But I think it is very much in that, in some ways, it tracks in that same way, but then takes the opposite view, where Cuphead and Plucky Squire both feel inviting to a wide audience because of their art style, where Cuphead's art style is in contrast with the white knuckle action, where here the art style actually is very fitting for sitting down with a 8 or 10-year-old to play this game. Like, I think if you have a young kid that can read, this game is perfectly fine to play. And that's, if you're, think about my own son, who couldn't play Zelda until he could read, and so at the age of 4, when he started reading, he could play Zelda on the DS. So if you're able to read, I think that this game is inviting to you. But it also, because of kind of the overall the over tutorialization, there we go, for the most part, I think that outside of some of the stealth aspects in the beginning, but once you get through that, it is very user friendly, very new player friendly. And so I think that it moves in that direction more so, in the trading on its art style, but then kind of pushing players to really challenge them.
Very cool. Anything else on the Plucky Squire?
No, but I am excited to hear your I Am Your Beast play experience, because I know we talked about that when you played the demo back in the summer.
So I actually did not play the demo. I was big on this game from seeing it at, I think, at Indie Game Fest. So that like March or May Keeley show that went um, unnoticed by a lot of people. But I've been big on it since then. It was on my tracking list, and I finally got a chance to pick it up. So I posted some gameplay of this on Twitter earlier today. It is and I can't remember um, the description of the game that they themselves refer to it as. I think it's a covert revenge uh, first person shooter. I think there's another word in there, but what I want to say is, first of all, like these, it's starting with this cutscene in between really sharp, witty dialogue that, I mean, it sounds kind of like if John Krasinski, who of course is playing Jack Ryan, which is a very serious spy thriller thing, but if John Krasinski were playing a spy thriller as Jim from The Office, like that's what this dialogue is like, and it's
a little bit of tinged with sarcasm constantly.
Yes, very dry humor, tinged with a lot of sarcasm. It's like super funny. So I think the critical thing for me in this game is it took me a couple of hours to kind of really figure out what it was trying to get me to do, and I was like, is this game trying to get me to speed run it? Is this game, because at first I thought that the game was mostly about combat, but it's really about speed, but at least that's what I thought. And then it kind of pulled me back, and I said, no, this game is really a really perfect combination of an equal weight between the two. And there are some variances in the levels where you will complete a level and you'll have standard objectives here, like use laptops. But then, like I think level 8 was the first one that I hit. Then, like every 8 levels or so, 7 or 8 levels, it tells you have, in order to progress to the next screen, to the next level, you have to have completed 2 of the previous missions with an A rating. And so that forces you to go back. And when you've completed those levels, you will get additional challenges. So the next time, so if I try and go back and run this one to get an A, it's not just going to be use 3 laptops. It's going to be like use 3 laptops and kill all, kill all enemies on the screen, which is the first challenge that I was trying to surmount when I went back and started replaying some of these levels, which is much more difficult than you think it is. At least it was for me, because you're trying to move at speed, right? So the letter ratings, first of all, are primarily driven by speed, and then secondarily by challenge. So you're always on the clock, right? And your scores will be increased by completing certain challenges or getting certain bonuses, but it's kind of like playing a football game and not wanting to rely on field goals, right? Like you don't want to rely on the bonuses being the determinant to you, getting the necessary score. Although that's the way it works out a lot of the times, but you play the game, right, to make time. So
your scores, can I ask a score question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm trying to look at your gameplay here. Is the score, is there a multiplier as you keep going? Like you need to keep chaining together scores, as in some games where you're trying to do this quickly, or is the score factor not only time but the amount of ammo or the type of weapon used, or do those all factor into your grade?
No, there's no ongoing multiplier. So if you look at the timer at the top of the screen, and again, sorry for audio listeners, but if you are listening to this and you want to get a shot of the gameplay, it is posted on my channel, my YouTube channel, Rounding Off Infinity. But if you look at the bar and you see it's ticking down that letter grade based solely on time. When you get to the end of the level and complete it successfully, then it will add multipliers based on certain things, and that's why I'm saying you never know, right? You're never guaranteed what those multipliers are going to be, so you don't want to push it, right? When you're going for a grade. Right now, I'm just going through to try and complete this level, And so I'm not like really wrapped around the axle about the grade. And that's kind of the OODA loop, right, of the game. You're going to go onto these levels, and you've got to complete the basic objectives. Use the laptops. As you see, I'm having to do multiple runs here because when you go in, you don't know where the enemies are located. You don't know where health pickups are located. You don't know where weapon drops are going to be. So there's a lot.
Procedural, or do they spawn in the same spot?
They spawn in the same spot.
Okay,
so
it becomes a big puzzle to some degree then.
Exactly. It's a speed plus combat puzzle, right? So you're trying to figure out where things are, and each time you go through, you're thinking, okay, well maybe this time I need to hit like the other laptop first. Like, what order am I going to do them in? And then typically at the end of every level, there's some type of escape hatch to get off the level. And so you're trying to figure out that stringing together in the way that makes it most effective for you to complete the level in time. Now, when you're engaged in combat happens so quickly that you're just not really, at least for me, I'm not really conscious of like specific like combat sequences. Like I don't have a strategy or a shtick, right? My strategy is shoot the gun as quickly as possible until it runs out. And then you notice he does it. And this is why this game grabbed me when it first came out, is because it reminded me of John Wick. And so it's, you notice when he empties the magazine, then he throws the handgun. And so, my shtick is, like I said, fire the bullets until the gun runs out, then throw the weapon, and then just rapidly hit E as I'm running around the level just to pick up whatever. So unlike other shooter games where it's like, okay, yeah, I definitely want to get the shotgun and that's my preferred weapon, or I definitely want to get the pistol, or like when we play Destiny 2, and you have a weapon that's super powerful, the fusion rifle, but a certain level is going to throw people at you so quickly, or in a certain way that you need to arm a scout rifle or a pulse rifle, right, in order to get through the level. There is none of that here, right? It's just you pick up whatever you can, and shoot, as quickly as you possibly can, because you just don't have time to think as you're trying to get through these levels. And then, like I said, then there's the loop of you have to go back and complete the levels for time. And so what I was mentioning is because you're always on the clock and you're always at speed, it's hard sometimes to get those when the challenge is like kill every enemy, because so many times you will, in the heat of battle, you'll throw your gun at somebody, but you'll forget, like, oh, that's right, that guy's not dead, he's just unconscious. And then so you have to loop back to like kick him, right, or do some type of melee. So it was like super frustrating when I was trying to get an A, because I get to the end of the level, I'd get to the hatch, I'd try and open it, and I'd look up at the little, because it'll present a little ticker of how many enemies you have killed. And then I'll be like, oh, there's one more left, or there's two more left. And you have no idea where the guy is because you don't remember who it is that you forgot to actually kill. But other than the construction of those challenges, right, the in the moment gameplay, super awesome. Like, as you're seeing the action here, and I will also say that's a thing that I had to learn. To me, at least right now, this is not a game to me that you just like plow through at speed. I'm sure like people who are really great at video games, which I'm not, are able to do that. But for me, like, I am at my best in these levels where I kind of sprint and drift. And so like I move very quickly, like handle a couple of engagements, and then move at a slower pace. You probably can't really necessarily tell in the video here, but you do, when you're moving at normal pace, you're running, really. But then you can hit shift and you get a sprint, and then you'll see him go into this mode where you see the motion blur around the corner of like the iris of the screen, right? It's a circular hue like that. So I go back and forth between like sprinting at full speed versus just running at the normal speed, is the way that I'm most effective at combat. So and that also particularly gives me time to like figure out a level. As you see here, I'm like, oh crap, there's like gaps on this level, and this is the first time I'm being presented this in the game. When you see most of these runs are like, these levels are like a minute or less. Some levels are like 38 seconds. even faster when you're trying to get things for A. So they're very short, quick levels. I can't remember. Maybe you remember the game that was on, I think the 3DS N. So it feels very much like N. There's like these little brief snippets of action that, as you said, are kind of like a puzzle that you have to figure out. You go through and you rerun them. When you fail, you rerun them when you're trying to get those challenges to get an A to progress to the next thing. But there's a little bit of a grind to it in terms of you constantly having to go back and do some of these things and getting frustrated at like certain failures because so many times I would when I was going for that A on the other mission, I would end like I think like 3 times I ended like with like decrementing gaps of like less than a second to get like 0.85 of a second, 0.65 of a second, 0.3 of a second. I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. So, but I'm having a great time with it. Supposedly they say that the game is only 2 hours in length. I guess maybe if you run every level perfectly the
Sure,
first
right?
time.
Just getting a perfect run through it all, but
Yeah.
that's gonna take you multiple hours to do.
Right.
It seems super both intense, but also, like, because the quick starts, like, you can see where you missed, and you wanna go back right back in and try it again, right? There seems to be a really good hook in terms of keeping you engaged with it.
Yeah, it is super intense. Like, I mean, again, these levels are less than 60 seconds, and so in the like it's kind of like a football play, right? All of your thinking to me has to be done in the huddle, and then your walk up to the line of scrimmage. And once the ball is snapped, like there's no time to think, right? It's just time to move and time to flow. And so it's kind of interesting that last week I was talking about RKGK Rakugaki. There's in that how that invoked feelings of Mirror's Edge or any of these types of games that are about flow and speed. There's one of these levels that like as I was ending it, that's exactly what the guy said. The guy was like, he's doing parkour. So and so it evokes feelings like that, but then you add in the combat piece as well. It's one of those games that feels like super tight and super good when you kind of pull something off and execute. It gives you that feeling of just perfection, right? Of skill, of like being on that vibe or whatever you want to call it.
Well, I feel
um
myself like cheering you on watching this run, right? Like you just ran out of time in that one. Like you got further. Like every time you're doing it, you're getting a little bit further, or there's a new wrinkle of somebody who pops up. Um, is there aim assist in it, or like when you're throwing knives, it seems like you're hitting perfectly. Is it tight because of just your reticle and mouse and keyboard skills, or is there a little bit of forgiveness in some of those melee weapons or throwing weapons?
with throwing the gun, I feel like that's very automatic. Like you empty the magazine and it throws the gun at the person you were shooting at, right? For
Okay.
the most part. So I don't think there's a lot of miss there. Knives are aimed, right? I have thrown a knife and seen it like plow into the ground, at a guy's feet, right? Because I didn't have it at the right place. So there is some forgiveness, but it's not universal, right? With some of the weapons.
Cool. I remember this, this developer. So this developer is Strange Scaffold, which this is their third game over the course of 12 months. They had El Paso Elsewhere, the kind of Max Payne like game last fall. This spring, they had Click Holding, which was kind of a clicker game that came out. And so all from this kind of small studio that they seem to be finding very tight, very focused experiences and creating kind of smaller, intense games around them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it was obviously I've played a lot of kind of the Call of Duties and the World of Warships and stuff this week, but it was nice, and this came about from the same thing that I talked about last week, right? being very deliberate about going into OpenCritic and getting past the first page. This game is, I think, like 100 in the 130s in terms of games on OpenCritic that have scored 70 or above so far this year. So, I just went into the list, picked a random number, started scrolling through it and doing research on those games. And I came across this one and remembered, that I was excited about it at Indie Game Fest, and went in and picked it up. I think it's $20 on Steam right now, so it's a pretty good get.
Cool. Great.
Any other questions or comments?
No.
Okay, let's go ahead and go on to the news.
I think as you're pulling up the news, I just want to say, like, your approach to kind of digging back through OpenCritic and Metacritic and looking at some other stuff that hasn't necessarily popped in terms of some of the bigger coverage. I found myself doing the same thing and going back through, and there's definitely some indie games that just came out in the past couple weeks, the past, this quarter, that I know I want to spend some time with before we get into end of the year stuff.
Yeah, it's a fun pastime, because unfortunately, and I think we've talked about this before. Like, unfortunately, the zeitgeist in gaming is driven by what the media covers, and so if you only gain interest in what the media is covering, you're going to wind up with a very incredibly limited palette, because they don't spend the clock cycles raising games up that are outside of that bubble, outside of kind of that center of mass that they're looking at. And that, I mean, obviously, magazines, publications, websites, they're a business. So, but you if you're not, if you don't want your gaming experience driven solely by the business of media publications, then you need to have algorithms that cause you to seek out other things. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, one of the games that was on my list from our conversation this summer around some of these indie games was Parcel Core, which just came out this week as well. That was the bicycle jet grind radio that I remember we talked about during some of the Indie Game Fest stuff back in the summer.
Yeah, that didn't hit its announced release date, because I went to that page and it wasn't available that day. So it is out now.
Yes, it's out now. It looks on Steam that it hit October 3rd, so just a few days ago.
Okay, very cool. First news story in the rundown. This story over on Tom's Hardware. Ryzen 9000X 3D CPU performance allegedly exposed. Leak claims a double-digit multi-core performance uplift over Ryzen 9000. Code Commando, a leaker with a relatively short track record, has shared the alleged Cinebench R23 performance for AMD's Ryzen 9000X 3D processors. The individual had previously leaked AMD's Ryzen 9000 slides, which did turn out to be legitimate. So his information is seemingly good. Nonetheless, as with any leak, we recommend you treat leaked benchmarks cautiously. The big tail of the tape here is, if you're familiar with the Ryzen line, you've known that for, I think, the last 2 generations, and now going into this one, they have released their baseline processors, which end with X. They have then released their enthusiast processors, which have been X950, and so there's been the 5900. I'm sorry, there's been the 5950X and the 7950X, and then they have released versions of their processors with 3D cache, which have typically gone on. And so the way the product line has fallen out in those enthusiast processor lines, typically the X950X version of the processor, to me, is the type of chip you go after if you do more than just game. So if you do video editing, audio editing, live streaming, things like that, you probably want to go for that type of processor. If you are looking for just ultimate game performance, then you might want to go after the X3D type processor. And so those have come out, I think, in X800 X3D flavors and X950 X3D flavors. And then I think last generation they released like a lower end X3D SKU. I think they did like a 7600X3D. So the X variant processors start at X600. And so throughout Ryzen there's been the 1600X, the 2600X, the 3600X, which to me is really kind of the first processor you start at if you're a builder and you're looking to build a gaming PC. And so this is the rumored X3D version. The Ryzen 9000 chips have not released to a lot of fanfare. There's been a lot of problems with the way AMD went about testing it. It turns out the manner in which AMD was testing it was supposed to be reflective of a Windows update, which Microsoft did not release concurrently with the chip. So this is the much vaunted 24H2 Windows update, which I think is out on the street now, might still be impending. And so that allows for greater performance than lots of reviewers were seeing with the 9000 chips when they first released. So behind those, these X3D processors have been rumored to be hitting the market potentially as soon as this month or next month. And so the 9000 series line isn't even fully filled out yet. The only thing that's out is I think the 9700, maybe the 96 and the 9700X. I can't remember exactly which ones they are, but again, they have typically gone X600, X700, X800, and an X900. So 6, 7, 8, and so 4 primary baseline SKUs, and then there have been the enthusiast processors. So this leaker has gotten a hold potentially of either the chips or at least test data associated with these chips, and they are seeing anywhere from a 13 up to a 32% higher multi-core performance across the board. I think probably in games, and so very promising. The hope is that Ryzen 9000 just launched, kind of tripped up at the shoestring with the Microsoft stuff, but hopefully the generation will go on and be better and see improved performance across chips, and AMD and Microsoft will get their act together. There's lots of discussion about recommendations to not buy the 9000 series baseline chips that have come out because they don't necessarily offer better performance in comparison to last generation X3D types of chips. I won't get into my own personal recommendations about how I approach that. I think it's a little bit of a question in some of those recommendations because there's a lot of discussions about the difference between like the 7000 series chips and the 9000 series chips, and I'm kind of like, guys, nobody on a 7000 series chip should be thinking about upgrading to a 9000. So it's really a discussion of, if you're on a 5000 series Ryzen, does it make sense for you to upgrade to a 9000 series Ryzen? And then there's a lot of the playing with, well, you shouldn't upgrade to a 9000. You should go for a 7000, X3D type of chip. And I'm just kind of like, maybe, but I mean, even if real world game performance is better on those 7000 series chips, at the end of the day, those 7000 series chips are going to go obsolete before the 9000 series. And the other thing is, this is always a typical stick of mine, is I get and understand why people go with real world gaming performance, but I'm like, you do understand that's because those games were coded in lots of cases with those older chips in mind. They weren't coded with the newer chips in mind. So as games continue to come out that then target the newer chips, you would think that as we go forward in time, that those games will perform better on the newer chips. So I think there's just a few more variables in there to be considered. But at any rate, the point here is that 9000 series X3D processors on their way with significantly greater performance. I think a thing to keep an eye on is it seems like the biggest lift is in multi-core in hyper-threading performance. I do think game developers have gotten much better over the years about using multiple threads. That was not always the case, which again I think is playing into some of the decisions Intel is making about taking hyper-threading out. as they've done more than I think once before at least. But yeah, so people should be excited about X3D. That to me is a reason to hold off, right? Not so much, get an older chip, but the notion that the performance lift is much bigger with the X3D chips that are coming, I think is a good reason to hold off. If you're going after an X3D chip, make sure you understand TDP with those chips and how hot they tend to run, and doggone sure be planning on getting a 360 millimeter AIO probably to cool them. You can air cool them, but my experience, and I've done a build with a 7950X and a 5950X. My personal experience has been, I'm not playing games when I go after one of those chips. I'm going to nuke it from orbit and be absolutely certain that I've got the cooling on it that I need. DBQ, are you in the market for an upgrade anytime soon?
I'm not currently. I think looking at this and thinking about kind of the August news around NVIDIA and layoffs and some of the struggles that NVIDIA was having, I think it's nice to hear AMD get out there with some encouraging news in terms of their performance in the midst of that.
Yep. We'll go on to the next news story. This news story over on PC Gamer. Civilization 7 system requirements are here, and they look downright breezy. Plus, you'll only need 20 gigabytes of storage space. This news story by Andy Edser. If you're running an older machine, system requirements can be a cause of dread. Will you finally have to update that aging GPU? Is that several generations behind CPU finally past its sell-by date? Well, if you're planning on picking up Civilization 7 when it releases next February 11th, you probably don't have to worry. It looks about as easygoing as modern major releases come. And so system requirements, I'm just going to go straight to Ultra. So if you want to run Ultra with graphics preset on high and play at 4K, 60 frames per second, you will need a Core i7 14700F, so a Raptor Lake processor, and an AMD Ryzen 9 5950X. So again, enthusiast type processors, but at least the 5950X, now you're talking about 2 generations ago, enthusiast processor. And even though they're recommending the Intel Core, the newest Intel Core so far, there's rumors that Arrow Lake may be launching Q4 of this year, and so we may see new chips come there from the Intel side. It is a 14,000. It's a 14,700, not a 14,900. 14,900 being their highest end SKU. Of course, their 13,900, 14,900 processors are the ones that have also been in the news about breaking VBIN and that causing problems, and that intermixing with crazy things that MSI does in particular, and also ASUS on the motherboard side. So I wouldn't be super happy about any game coming out saying that you needed to be on one of those chips. So at least it's on the slightly lower end of the performance of the highest performance tier on Intel side. 32 gigabytes of RAM. You only need 20 gigabytes of storage, and so this is really nice to see a AAA game that, quite frankly, is of the magnitude of Civilization 7. That doesn't need that much. I just installed World of Warships on my highest end machine today. That sucker takes 67, 68 gigs.
For World of Warships. 20 is tiny. It's so surprising, right? Like, I can see why they would have spec'd it on the low end in terms of graphics cards, right? The minimum graphics card is only a GTX 1050 or an RX 460, and 8 gigs of RAM. Like, for non-hardcore players or non-consistent PC gamers, that Civilization is one of those that people have dipped in and out of. People of all ages have dipped in and out of. And so having something that an older machine can run, or your laptop that you're using primarily for, home or work, can also run this, or can likely run it, even at minimum specs. Like, I think that this opens this up to the audience that they want for a Civilization. It does not need to be pushing massive amounts of graphics to show you all your units. You want the broad piece because people are coming for the strategy more than they are for the graphical resolution.
Right. So as you mentioned on the high end for the GPUs, and so they're to round out those high end specs for Ultra, they want you on Windows 10 or 11, and they want you on DirectX 12. And in fact, across the board for minimum recommended and Ultra, they want you on DirectX 12. GPU wise, if you want to be at the high end, playing in 4K, looks like they want you on an RTX 4070 for 60 frames per second, or the RX 7800 XT if you are on Radeon. And so the nice thing is about that spec is they want you on the 4070, which is the mid range card. And then obviously you have lift in the 4070 line because you have the 4070 Ti and the 4070 Super. So you even have a few SKUs of options there. So looks the graphical Civilization doesn't necessarily push a game hard for performance, but it will push a game. It will push a gaming PC hard for image quality, and so there's going to be lots of bells and whistles. That screen is going to get super busy by the time you get to end game in a campaign with units all over the screen, and so you're going to want to have some muscle there. But it's nice to see that the specs are reasonable, I think.
Yeah,
Okay,
I would agree.
You've got the next
I
one.
do, and I feel like this was a story that I picked because I thought Ta would be here to be able to talk about some Fortnite. But also, I think I do want to hit it. I don't know, there's a whole lot to talk about. But so this is the news story on Saturday night or on Saturday night in the UK, Saturday during the day over in America, depending on your time zone, that the Fortnite had their kind of climactic battle against Doctor Doom as part of their current season. And they had a concurrent peak of 5.6 million players. And I think that number for me is one, it's not as big as their previous high of 11.6. This story is coming out of Eurogamer from yesterday, 11.6 for the Big Bang event last year. But still 5.6 million concurrent. I want to bring it up because of the scale of it. That Pal World hit records for concurrent back on Steam back in January when it released, and it was 2.1. Black Myth Wukong hit in August and had 2.4 million concurrent, and both of those got great press, huge numbers for Steam. And even in this case, Fortnite, for their mediocre turnout for a climactic battle of the end of their season, they still double that concurrent player base of things that are grabbing headlines throughout the rest of the year. Like if we talk about new games that created a big pop, the peak concurrent for Power World and Black Myth certainly dominated some news cycles. And here's a quiet little news story about Fortnite and the sheer volume of players that it can still pull in. And I think it's not surprising, but it also sometimes takes me aback because when it's not always in the news cycle, I don't always think about it in the same way. And this goes back to, I think it was last year or earlier this year when we had the news story around the survey that came out in terms of games that people are playing, and that the majority of games that people are currently playing are games that are 3 years old or older. That the new game market space is a much, it's only 20 to 24%. I think I remember that number. So this is just an example of how that, where those numbers play out and what that looks like in real time.
Yeah, a lot of Doctor Doom going on since RDJ's announcement. Since the announcement that RDJ was going to be Doctor Doom. Comics are currently doing Venom War, which it turns out is a big hissy fit between Kang and Doctor Doom and them manipulating sides in order to try and get revenge on each other, which I thought was just hilarious what the whole skullduggery was behind that.
Yep. And we get Doctor Doom in the new Marvel Ultimate universe is the new spin on him as well. So there's plenty of press around that.
Yeah, I haven't been reading. I read the Black Panther Ultimate, but I haven't. And I think I read a Spider-Man Ultimate, but I just haven't gone whole hog down that path. Now you got DC starting their
Yep.
absolute
power.
So,
yep.
Yeah. Next story in the rundown is while Fortnite has been quiet in the news, Ubisoft has not. In fact, I want to say I feel like we have covered Ubisoft on like the last 4 episodes.
I think so, right? Because we had the delay of
Assassin's
Creed. We had the news story around the kind of retooling of Star Wars Outlaws.
Right. Mm-hmm. So this news story over on GameSpot, Ubisoft is reportedly considering a major change to its structure. This news story by George Yang. Ubisoft and Tencent are reportedly considering different options in order to stabilize the business and prevent further stock price drops. According to Bloomberg, Ubisoft's Guillemot family and Tencent have reportedly discussed turning Ubisoft private, or even Tencent potentially buying out the company. These discussions are reportedly still at an early stage, so it might be a while before we see any results. There's also no guarantee that the discussions will bear fruit, but Tencent and the Guillemot family are reportedly open to other alternatives. Now, nothing has been reported the past week that the whole Ubisoft, thing has gone hot, other than speculation and rumor, and according to sources familiar with the matter, and blah 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 blah. Let me also once again indicate, as I frequently do, that this is coming out of Bloomberg. Which, look, you can have whatever opinions you want, but again, Bloomberg has been cited multiple times over the last 2 years. They've been called out directly by Dell, Apple, and Nintendo, often directly by the CEOs of those companies for things that they have gotten wrong. And so, I think it's my personal evaluation is that they do pick up on things, but their level of accuracy about that, I think personally, I feel leaves much to be desired. What I do think it's pertinent to know about this is that last year, I think maybe the year before, Tencent made a significant investment. They did not make that investment into Ubisoft. They made that investment into the Guillemot family's holding company that owns shares in Ubisoft. And so it was kind of like, a cousin, twice removed. This is similar. I think the analogous situation I would kind of think about, even though it's not a shareholder thing, is that the fact that Strauss Zelnick is, even though he has the label as CEO of 2K, right, that actual arrangement is that he and his partner actually are a small company or business, and that business actually has the contract to be the CEO of 2K. And so 2K doesn't pay Strauss Zelnick, they pay his company, right? And then from that, he takes his pay and he distributes some minimal percentage to his partner. It's actually like a ridiculous percentage of the way that profit sharing works. But at any rate, but when Tencent made that investment in the Guillemot family holding company, one of the stipulations was that either because of the percentage that they own, or maybe it was a kind of like a prenuptial agreement kind of clause, but it specifically disbarred them from using that position to buy Ubisoft or to increase its stake in Ubisoft. And so what I don't know is, as all these things have been reported, there's essentially, what I would equate to like a stay time, right? A statute of limitations, if you want to think of it that way, between when they made that investment and when they would ever be eligible to directly buy Ubisoft. And I don't believe that timeline has expired yet. And so whatever goes on and whatever they would attempt to pull, if they were going to pull something now, this maneuver to consider taking Ubisoft private is the exact type of thing that I believe could be allowed under that arrangement, because in that case, Tencent is not buying Ubisoft. It is the Guillemot family taking Ubisoft private, which Tencent, and my whole thought was the whole time this thing went down, is that that gives them influence into, it doesn't give them a seat at, and in fact, one of the other caveats they made was, when they made that investment, I think it prevents them from actually either being on the board of directors, or I forget exactly what that is. But the point is that under the current arrangement, they do not have a seat at the table themselves. They are essentially, the Guillermo family is essentially their proxy, if you will. And so, again, them taking the company private could be the exact type of thing that they could do within the restrictions of that arrangement, as far as I understand it. And so that would be super interesting, right? People, I think gamers maybe, don't understand or aren't aware. Michael Dell took Dell private in 2013 in response to Carl Icahn being I forget what the term is. Is it agitating investor or something like that? But in response to Carl Icahn constantly calling for a sale of Dell, and Michael Dell just finally kind of got tired of it and made some arrangements with some other investment sources and took the company private, and that has turned out surprisingly well for Dell Corporation. So it would be super interesting to see Ubisoft pull this off. DBQ, your thoughts?
No, I'm looking back and thinking about the Dell piece makes me think back to mid-teens, 2017, where we get the Ubisoft. I think it started back in 15, but by 2017, 18, Ubisoft had pretty much fended off Vivendi in terms of its hostile takeover. And, that was an ongoing news cycle piece and an investor piece for quite a number of years as they were trying to hold off Vivendi from having a controlling share. And again, pulling it back, going private certainly is another way to eliminate that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, and again, for people who don't understand, or like what. So there has obviously been a lot of the discussion last year around the layoffs and things that were going on in the industry, and attributing that to the fiduciary legal responsibility that C-suite officers have to do their utmost efforts, their best job to return value to shareholders. You have the comment from the studio head of Larian saying, we don't what was it? We don't have investors, or we don't have shareholders, and I certainly don't think about them. And so you have a lot of the vitriol, right, in the negativity of the state of the industry around this need to serve shareholders. And what taking a company private does is that you get rid of that, right? You don't have that as an anchor weighing you down. You don't have those influences determining what products you make, or what investments you make, or what acquisitions you go after, or quite frankly, the need to sometimes go after acquisitions. It gives you a lot more freedom. And so, what the question becomes, what does an Ubisoft do without that anchor around its neck? That could be a super positive. We talk about the goods of Ubisoft and the fact that the crew, right? The Crew Motorfest, is a community that gets served. Riders Republic, which I just look, for the sake of our argument, I'm just saying there's no way in the world Riders Republic is a profitable business venture, and yet that
Still
community
supported,
gets new content. You have even though the head of the Rainbow Six franchise wound up leaving this week, but still I would contend that you have to consider Rainbow Six Siege as an amazing success story, one that maybe people aren't happy about, but I firmly remember back in the early teens when Rainbow Six Siege was coming out. I want to say universally the panel of that at that point. We weren't E2KG yet. We were the game. I forget what we were, but the Gamers Podcast or whatever.
Right. Band of Gamers, whatever we were.
Yes.
Yep. But yeah, right when Rainbow Six came out on Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Yep.
Yeah, with Siege, right, that we were all universally not pleased about, that there was going to be no no single player campaign, that they were going to remove the notion of co-op, that terrorist hunt wasn't going to be as much of a thing. And it came out right to negative reception. But Ubisoft doubled down, and now that's one of the most successful games as a service franchises right in the industry. So, again, there's a lot of potential for a private Ubisoft winding up making something super positive with their franchises. Then we have the allegations of misconduct at Ubisoft, sexual harassment, misogyny, right? All these types of things. And so then there's I'd say almost equally potential for it to be bad, horrifically bad. I mean, we finally got rid of Bobby Kotick, probably for one reason, right? And that's the fact that they were a publicly traded company, which, again, with all the people that were around him, being his defense force, that still took decades, right, to get that turnover to occur. But eventually it happened. What happens at an Ubisoft where you don't have that protective layer, right? So I don't know, man. It's anybody's game. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
No, I think you captured it well. I think framing it within the holdings aspect is really important here. But I think having this kind of rumor come shortly after the investor call, which is what we were talking about before, about the delays, that being a private company means that you don't necessarily have those quarterly benchmarks that you're trying to hit for investors. And so delaying a game doesn't have the same ramifications when you're not lost me there. When you're not getting right, when you're not trying to be accountable to shareholders. And so I think that could be in the long run a really good thing as long as there's stability there.
Yep. And 2 comments from Hero Down Under. I just hope whatever happens, Ubisoft bounces back better, and Dell going private work massively. You made a really good point about quarterly benchmarks and not being incentivized to make decisions. We have Capcom, who put out Dragon's Dogma 2, like literally at the end of a reporting quarter, in not great shape, in my opinion, from a performance, a graphical performance perspective. And that's the reason. I mean, unquestionably, that's the reason they put it out, right? Was to make that quarterly deadline and have that contribute to the earnings for that quarter. So, DBQ, you want to talk about another IP that is under some legal duress?
Sure. Let's just take a quick hit here because there's not a whole lot of news about it. Just an announcement that Krafton is bringing Pal World to mobile, so that Krafton has secured the IP in a deal with Pocket Pair. This is off of gamesindustry.biz, but it is citing the Krafton PR release in Japanese in terms of bringing Pal World to mobile under the development team of PUBG Studios. So this is in the midst of pending lawsuits from Nintendo and Pocket Pair in Japan in terms of patent lawsuits. But moving forward, as we saw with the PlayStation 5 release of it a few weeks ago, and now announcements of bringing it mobile just a few weeks before the new mobile release of from the Pokemon Company around the trading card game coming to mobile at the end of this month.
All right, very cool. And last news story in our rundown is not quite a news story, but more is just kind of a quick discussion piece. Over the weekend, or heading into the weekend, we got indications and warnings that a third-person mode, well, 3 things actually, that there was apparently a battle royale under development at 343. I think it was the component that had been outsourced to, I can't remember the name of the small business that has historically helped 343 a lot with Halo properties.
Yes, I'm trying to think of it. They made maps. They made a lot of multiplayer maps, and it's former Halo 2 people.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that was apparently canceled. We also then shortly right after that, or concurrently, got word that a third-person Halo mode is on its way, and the conjecture at this point, or the rumor, is that theoretically we're getting that because that mode is an operational asset from the Battle Royale work that was going on, and then today, I think, or at some point over this weekend, we also then got the third tidbit drop.
I think it was just today. Yeah.
Okay.
Or yesterday at IGN. Yeah.
That Halo is shifting to UE5, Unreal Engine 5. Now, we had gotten that rumor, I want to say last year, but today it was corroborated. 343 has also renamed itself to Halo Studios, I believe, is their new name. So, and this is the follow-on to, I guess, a few months ago, that we had gotten the word. We had seen indications and warnings that, they had mentioned that, when I think it was early last year, that this was going to be the last season, and that they were going to go to much more of just kind of not episodic, but just kind of smaller drops of content as a recurring type of service. It was going to be less wrapped around the notion of a battle pass and a season. They also concurrently mentioned, when they made that announcement, that they were spooling up to work on other properties within the Halo universe, and that they would have more to announce. And so here we are. We're starting to get those announcements. The major vanguard of that will be a shift to the new engine. What winds up kind of foremost in my mind is, I can't remember what their engine, the Infinity engine that Halo is on. I may have
It
that
might
name wrong.
be. I'm trying to remember. It might be. That sounds
Or
right.
Slip Space.
There we go.
Yep. So
yeah, Infinity is different.
So the question then becomes, okay, great, all the new stuff is going to be on UE5. What happens to, like, the legacy? What happens to the MCC collection? What happens to Halo Infinite? Now, as a software guy, I tell you what happens to it. I retire those things, so I'm not going to put bodies on those software as a service or those properties, if I'm shifting everything architecturally, right? Maybe I make an effort to remake those things in UE5, which would be prudent, so that they can be more easily maintained going forward. But if not, bye they go, because I'm not going to wear that anchor around my neck. I'm skating forward into the future, and my future is clearly going to be Unreal Engine 5. So DBQ, how does these four news points hit you?
In some ways, it hits me that what I thought was kind of end of life for Halo Infinite, when we had the announcement that this was going to be the last season, seems to be looking at, I don't know, maybe not necessarily a new game, but a new breath of fresh air for it if it moves over into UE5. I think it's interesting to add a third person perspective into a game that has historically been only first person. But I could also see that if it's moving into UE5 and trying to catch some of a more casual base, or pull people off of things like, as we talked about, the 5 point some million concurrent players of Fortnite, that if it now can speak to those players who are used to a third person perspective and bring people into it, then maybe that does breathe a little bit of a new life in. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, right? We saw third person go into Modern Warfare 3 last year, or 2. It was one of those where it brought
Modern
it in.
Warfare 3.
Yep. Thank you. And how that kind of plays. But I think in the long run, moving it to UE5 seems to be setting it up for the future. I think it will be interesting to see what happens to all the Forge and all the other mods and created content, right? Like, how much of that just stays within that walled garden of their original engine and what it looks like when they start moving things over. But the last news story I remember hearing out of 343 was, some downsizing that had gone on in addition to the end of the seasons. So with a rename, hopefully that, and a refocus, maybe that speaks to something new, or at least a recommitment to Halo, where over the last 2 generations of consoles, it has not hit in the same way that Microsoft had hoped it would hit in terms of both timing and also probably revenue. So, and just as a follow-up, back when we started this conversation, I think we were both thinking of Certain Affinity as the secondary development studio that was helping 343.
Yep. So a lot of mixed impressions from this. One thing I think is that obviously with the move for Xbox to put more and more of its games on PlayStation, the Halo properties have come under discussion. Many pundits have asserted that Halo Infinite is going to show up on PlayStation. I think many of these pundits are ones that are of the ilk to make wild claims without any basis of fact. Um, what I would say is, to me, what this says is I would be surprised if Halo Infinite ends up on PlayStation 5, because again, if you're converting and moving your architectural pipeline over to UE5, why would you put the labor effort on a lift like that? If it's not your future.
Right. But what it speaks to potentially is that whatever the next Halo release is certainly becomes multi-platform if it's all running in UE.
Well, and that's the next thing, right? It's a curious, approach. Yes, that business model of the next Halo is going to be everywhere, because UE5 can be everywhere, including on mobile. It certainly shows the hand of leaning in that direction. It's interesting. I don't know that it says a great thing when you consider that as a platform owner, not even necessarily a hardware platform, right? But as a if you consider IPs as a platform, you make investments in engines, right? Because they power your development teams and they make your studios go. PlayStation does it. But again, I emphasize it's not just a hardware platform thing. EA does it, right? Frostbite is everywhere now. And despite all the wailing and gnashing of teeth and Sturm and Drang and angst over Frostbite, teams have taken that engine and they have modified it. And now all of your beloved franchise that sell millions and millions and millions and billions of millions of units, billions of dollars, to the point of drowning other things in the industry out, are on Frostbite. And let me tell you, that makes a huge positive in terms of EA's profitability, because now I'm not expending labor effort and putting engineers on engines and maintenance, right? You think about the fact that Madden, it's not just building the engine, right, but it's maintaining it and constantly progressing it. Like, that took a team and a chunk of people, and those people are no longer doing that. You now free up labor effort, right, for them to go do other stuff that you would hope would be more value added.
Yep. Yeah, and that's just the last 2 weeks we've had, FC 25 and NHL 25 all running off of Frostbite as well, right? It allows for that kind of annual release cycle.
And so, you might say, as I go through all that, you're like, well, that's the exact thing you would get from moving to UE5. And I'm like, yes, you would get that, but you also get no necessary differentiation, right? The reason EA invests in Frostbite is because they believe that enables them to do a thing that gives them more control. It's kind of like the Apple model. You look at, owning the whole stack. It's training people, right, that then have a common set of tools. And so if I move them to other development teams and they already know it, even though, like I said, Frostbite has now been tweaked and modified so that it's it's not just a first-person shooter engine. There's now tools and utilities to make it applicable to others. But my point is, people get exposed to it. But then on top of that is, now that I've got a person who's a 10-year, Frostbite developer, I get less concerned about them wanting to go somewhere else, right? Now I'm starting to get an EA employee who's vested, right, in staying in the company because they're hyper familiar with this tool and this. So just going down this path, I have to start asking questions about, what does it say and what does it mean when you're the largest publisher on the planet and your approach is now moving away from an engine that you've invested a ton of time and a ton of money and a ton of people in, so that you can start building your flagship franchise on Epic's game engine. It's just something to mull over and to think about, I think. Okay. Any other comments on that, DBQ?
No, I think we'll definitely have a chance to cycle back around to that as new things are released.
Let's go ahead and go into wrap up here in our segment 3, a regular rundown and round robin of our remaining gamer experience stories. I've been playing, my usual round of Call of Duty, World of Warcraft. I did have a question for you because I actually spent a little more time in Destiny 2 this week. Really need to ramp up and get back to that. I did not realize that Destiny 2 has a horde mode now. Were you aware of that?
Yes. I don't remember what it's called, but I think it came out within the last year or so. It didn't come with Lightfall. It came with, I think maybe it was one of the seasonal things that came in between before the final shape came. But yes. How is it? I haven't had a chance to, or I haven't dug into it.
I haven't played it yet. I popped a quest and I was like reading through, because of course, they always put these little breadcrumbs, like things to make you go play these modes that you normally like wouldn't want to be bothered with. But like that time that we played Gambit, I was like, this is a super fun game mode. Right? Granted, admittedly, only a game mode that I want to play with my friends. And so it has limitations there, that it's just not something that I'm going to solo queue in. But it is like a value added, like really fun game mode to play. Horde mode would be something that I will play, without necessarily having, my friends there, people that I know. As I've gone back to Destiny 2, I have particularly fallen in love with playing strikes, even though that's playing strikes with strangers, just getting back to that, when you queue up, and then it goes into like the launch screen, and like the three, guardian ships just coming into formation, and like everybody's like personalized, ride, just that moment.
There's still something good about it, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So
Horde mode was announced in March of this year, and it's called Onslaught. And it arrived in one of the last updates before the final shape.
Yeah, so I just thought that was super interesting when I read that, and wondered if you guys knew. I didn't suspect that when I saw it, because at first I saw it and I was like, I wonder if this would be like a thing that would make Tau and Swiss come back, and I'm like, probably not. But I think the concept is, I think it's something that they were like, that's super interesting. But yeah, I will probably eventually get around to playing it. Although, like I said, I haven't gotten a chance yet. I did pop a quest where they've been like, go do Onslaught. The one thing that I'm finding pleasant about it in going back is I feel like there's been a lot more tuning around. Hey, look, just instead of these like 90-minute treks, like to do a thing, where you start with something super innocent and innocuous like a patrol, and the next thing you know, you're 90 minutes deep into some Byzantine obfuscated like breadcrumb path to like do a thing. There's a lot more encapsulation in terms of like, hey, just go do, like I did a quest the other night. I think it was all of like 25 minutes, right, to get an exotic. It was like, go do this mission, go do that mission, go do this mission, bit bat boom, I was done. I was like, that's amazing. Like I always remember, like I never bothered with exotics, even when I
Right.
was in
The
the heyday.
14-step
Yeah,
quest line. Yeah.
yeah, which you had to Google, like to even figure out like what the heck it was you were supposed to do. So I find that change in this design approach to be the campaign approach to be like super inviting, instead of like what it used to be before.
You're
So
making. I'm getting the shakes. I'm getting the Destiny withdrawals here. You're tempting me. I was out, and then you're pulling me back in.
yeah, it's been super fun. I told you, like I know that other people will think that I'm nuts, but I got rid of all my old characters, right? Because the game had just gotten to the point where it was like it was so difficult to keep your character. Like it just made so much sense where after if you'd been away for a certain period of time to just roll a new character. So I was like, I just want the like first light experience like ground up because here's my thing, like the Red War campaign to me, like there have been some great Destiny 2 campaigns. I feel like gosh, I can't remember that. What was I feel like Forsaken. I feel like the Witch King.
Mm-hmm.
I even
Yeah.
liked Trials of
Osiris.
Osiris. Even
Yeah.
though maybe not a great campaign, but at least it allowed you to spend time getting familiar with Osiris and his background and lore, which
Yep.
has figured so greatly into the
Oh
the
yeah,
the,
when it
the
brought him back
tapestry.
into the
Yeah,
mythos. Yep.
yeah. So, but I gotta tell you, like as I've reflected on this over the last couple of months, like I'm like, no, like we always think about the expansions, but literally, now I can consider it now that it's unfortunately off the board. It's amazing to me how good the Red War campaign was. Like I get it, like it was the main story. I understand that, but as we move forward, it just became another encapsulated like adventure, and then unfortunately we lost it. Um, like if that were a thing, and now they have these time capsule kind of things where you can go back and you can play all the old adventures like in a timeline. It's kind of like I feel like it's like rewatching the MCU in chronological order. But I'm like if
Yeah,
they
but
were
they've rebuilt some of that. I mean, they're kind of trying to recapture even, it feels, I mean, I love it because we've been through that timeline, but it's kind of honoring some of that past in a way, just like WoW Classic acknowledges that there's still that people have nostalgia for some of those things, even if it isn't 20 years old. It's just 10 years old at this point with Destiny 1, but Destiny 2 in 2017. Yeah. I mean, we played through the Red War with a couple different characters, I think, over the years.
yeah, and that's like so I was just gonna say like if they were gonna put a lot of effort into bringing a thing back, like I would love it if they brought the Red War campaign back. But you have been playing something that is more modern, more bruised up, but also
Yeah.
with the legacy behind it.
Yeah, still playing some sports games, MLB The Show on PlayStation 5 and NCAA college football on Xbox, playing in my online dynasty. We are dynasty getting to the end of the regular season and making it into the bowl and the playoff push. So I had it's had a just a great game. I mean, great in like nail biting type of game. It was the Big Ten championship playing against Oregon, who I lost to in the regular season and have a rematch against in the playoffs. Right, this is where the head narrative really just comes in. But it came down to I was up trying to eat the clock, throw a pass, bounces off my receiver, intercepted. They come down and score. I get the ball back with a minute left. My receiver, my tight end, who had it bounce off his helmet before, makes a catch, runs out at the 9 with 6 seconds left. Throw it into the end zone. It gets batted down. 1 second left. Throw it again. The tight end makes a diving catch as the clock runs out, and I go ahead and win. So, I mean, it's just like one of those where like I actually stood up and cheered at the end of that, right? Like it was so close. But that's the fun of it's a fun of any type of game, right? Like whether it's a sports game, whether it is a multiplayer game, like you get into that rhythm and that tug of war and that back and forth in a multiplayer event or against a computer, and there's just something that kind of brings you into that zone. And that was definitely where I was. Now we're moving through the bowl playoffs, which is also interesting because this is the first year of the bowl playoffs. So trying to figure out like how this team that didn't get ranked at all ends up in the top 12 to make the playoffs, but it's because of the conference champs of the Power 5 conferences all get an automatic bid berth to the playoff, and then it goes from there. So it was interesting to kind of having to go out into the real world to look up the rationale of how the playoff bracket works and kind of making my way through there. So, but it's been fun. It's been fun because of having an online dynasty and with other people and being able to kind of see who we're going to meet as we meet each other in the playoffs.
All right, man. Very cool. As far as what is coming up next, I have no idea. I just haven't planned or thought forward about what I'm going to be playing as we go into next week. DBQ, you?
I am picking up Victory Heat Rally. So as we talk about little indie games that are coming up, so Victory Heat Rally is like a 16-bit racer with a lot of drifting. It just came out this past week. It's $17 on Steam, so definitely going to pick it up. Give it a chance to play it on Steam Deck. Should be a nice fit there.
Yeah, I have also not looked forward into next week's new releases, so I just don't know right now off the top of my head if anything major is landing next week. So tune in next week to find out if that changed and something popped up on our radar. So,
are you diving into the Diablo expansion?
I had plans to. If you roll back to the June showcase,
I kind of remember the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not Diablo's fault. It has the year has progressed. It just hasn't been. It briefly got back on my Diablo. Briefly got back on my radar, but it has not. It has not stayed there. And again, it's not the fault of Diablo. Some of the path that I go down. So the paths that I go down in gaming are sometimes, randomized, and sometimes I deliberately do that because I'm like, I don't want to just solely play, what I'd be given over to playing of my own accord, because you wind up missing stuff, right? This is why I go, and look at games, who scored 70 or above on OpenCritic and randomize, right? To force myself down paths of discovery. But yeah, just a lot of that stuff has been distracting enough that I just haven't gotten back on Diablo 4.
Fair.
So, I mean, there's a good chance that I will get into it, but it's just not on my radar to get into right away.
Yeah, right. Like over the course of the existence of that game, I'm sure I'll play it. I have no need to be playing it on day one type of thing.
Yeah. And there's still sales. when I picked up I Am Your Beast, Far Cry 6 was on sale on Steam for $15. So I grabbed that. So yeah, there's just always something, that we're picking up and collecting. So it makes it hard to get to the newer stuff that's coming out. But
yes,
but we will definitely
backlog continues to grow. Yep.
Right. So for everyone who joined us on the live show tonight, we appreciate you. Thanks a lot, Hero Down Under, for coming through. I believe there were multiple other people here who just didn't get a chance to join the chat. I'm sure some people were thrown off by us going live a little earlier. Just keep up with my Twitter account and the main YouTube page to see if that time sticks, or if we kind of go back and forth between the 8 o'clock and the 9 o'clock time. We'll see how that goes. But for everyone else who didn't get to join us live, who winds up watching this show in syndication on rerun and the VOD, we appreciate you as well. Please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, look, I don't say that because I'm worried about our numbers of subscribers. We don't monetize the channel. I don't believe that we ever will. I say that simply so that you get the reminder from YouTube that the show has posted, that the show is going live, or anything else that just makes your lives more convenient so that you can watch the show without, checking your clock, making a note in Google Keep, putting it on your calendar and getting a reminder or whatever. YouTube does that for you. So please, again, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That is going to do it for us for this week. I believe next week, Towmaster99 should be the host. If he is not, DBQ is listed as his alternate and backup. So we will see how that goes. I think that's going to do it for us. Until next time, take care of yourself. Stay safe out there. Play the games that you like. Come here to talk to us about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been GameLogIQ from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. Here with me as co-host, Mr. DBQ Hams. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here.